Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to another episode of Industry Insights. Jason is off this week. He's actually camping with several hundred Boy Scouts in the middle of nowhere, quite literally. So very pleased to be joined by Chris Hoff. Chris is our Global Security Marketing Specialist. Chris, thanks so much for jumping in today.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So speaking of dropping in, love to hear where you may be tuning in from. We've got a global map that we populate when all you have to do is whichever of the different platforms you might be viewing us on, just drop a comment in to say where you're tuning in from. I'm in Colorado. We've got production assistants in Texas and in Georgia. Chris is joining from Massachusetts area, and feel free to drop in any questions, comments, and of course your locale. And we'll revisit the map a couple times throughout the live stream. So today what we're doing is continuing a multi-episode, or actually Jason and I concluded last week, we're probably going to have 7 different episodes in a series on our ransomware research that we released just concurrent with Veeam a couple of weeks ago. It's the Ransomware Trends Report. And we'll drop in from time to time the URL for that link. I encourage you to check it out. It is not a Veeam commercial. Chris can attest to that. This is an industry level research. So we're not talking just about Veeam users, Veeam customers, Veeam products. It is the state of ransomware in the industry. And Chris, one of the things I like about this research is it's 1,000 organizations. It's 1,000 different people, but it's not just any old people. It's people that actually got hit with ransomware and the stories that, if you will, they lived to tell.
It's fantastic. From a research perspective, I wouldn't want to be one of those 1,000 people, but it's great that we were able to talk to these people and find out what it's really like to live through a ransomware incident.
Yeah, absolutely. And so without further ado, let's take a look at our first data point. And the first few slides here, Jason came up with the title, which I liked, and it's basically follow the money. And, Chris, we're looking at how did an organization actually pay, if they did pay for the ransom? And you can see that the majority, nearly half, paid through some sort of cyber-specific insurance coverage. And I want to pause on that and tee this up to you because I know you and Jeff Reichard on our team in particular have been looking at cybersecurity and the insurance aspect of this. And I believe there's been some changes there, meaning it's more difficult to get successful cyber insurance payouts now.
There definitely is. And, it's been coming for a while. When we first started with cyber insurance, there was this thought, generally speaking, that it was an easy button and you could just get your insurance and not have to worry about it. But then obviously insurance companies are in business to make money.
Yeah.
So they started putting kind of boxes around what they would pay out on. And what we're starting to see more and more is that if you're not following a specific set of standards, whether it's NIST or something else, depending on your industry, you're not going to get a payout, or you're not going to get help when an incident happens. And, it's also interesting to know that these companies that are getting their insurance payouts, they're just like when you get into a car accident, your rates are going to go up. And so it's becoming even more cost prohibitive to have cyber insurance, even though it is almost a requirement these days for doing business.
Yeah. And if we look at that, this next highest, nearly half at 47% said they paid through cyber-specific insurance. 1 out of 4, 25% said they paid through some other kind of insurance. So to your point, Chris, 72%, better than 7 out of 10, are saying that they've used some method of insurance to pay off the bad actors. Obviously, to your point, they're in it to make money, meaning insurance companies. It affects premiums. It affects the qualifications that you have to go through. And if we look at the next build out here, does your organization currently have a cyber insurance policy? The vast majority do to some degree. 57% said yes, and it's inclusive of ransomware. 30% said yes, but ransomware is excluded. And 11% said no, but they're actively looking for cyber insurance. I want to toss it back to you, Chris, because if you're in that 11% that may be looking for cyber insurance, the landscape, to your point or your last comments, has shifted slightly now.
Absolutely. And, it's, like I said, it's becoming harder and harder to get, I'll call it full coverage for cyber insurance. And that 11% is really having to dig deep into what they're really trying to protect, as well as what their real threats are, in order to come up with a good policy that they can afford and will be useful for them. And what's interesting too is that the organizations, that 30% of organizations said yes, they have insurance, but it's not covering ransomware. In a lot of cases, the reason for that is that there is usually a terrorism clause in your insurance policy. And insurance companies are looking at ransomware because it's coming from state actors. They're looking at it as a terrorist event. And so they're choosing essentially not to pay because of that. And let's face it, with the executive order from the White House, there's possibly consequences if they were to pay a bad actor who's from a country that we have some issues with.
Yep, great point. And let's hit the map really quickly because we had a lot of activity come in. I'm just looking off, and the production teams have been updating. Canada, of course, that covers a lot of real estate right there, so that lights up a good part of the country. We've had, let's see if I go around the whole area, Puerto Rico, Canada, Mexico. We've also got Spain, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and we've got Colombia, Angola, United Emirates, Oman. Oman might be a first one, or one that we haven't seen in quite some time. India, Bangladesh, and Angola. I did mention Angola. Good. And shout out to everyone. Thanks very much for chiming in. Continue, please, if you haven't already dropped in a comment. Love to see where you might be tuning in from. So, Chris, if I go back to another slide now, one of the things we like to point out is the old phrase, time does cost money. And we asked, how long after the attack was your organization able to start restoring data from the backups? The vast majority at 55% said it took between 2 and 4 hours. But if you look a little closer to the right-hand side, you start to get into days. You've actually got nearly almost 30%. It's 28% said it was 1 to 2 days or even 3 to 4 days. And you just think about downtime, Chris, even in your own life, if you had to be without your data or connectivity for 4 days, and that's when you start recovering. Doesn't mean you're back up and running. The impact that might actually equate to.
And that's huge. And you all did that, the research from the data protection report that said that, what was it, $88,000 an hour was the average cost for downtime.
Yeah.
I mean, you're really starting to talk about real money. And, I don't know a lot of organizations that have that kind of cash on hand. So yeah, you have to assume that there's conversations going on about, what can we cut in order to survive this type of an incident.
Yeah, great point. And, when you think about that now in context, how long did the entire remediation recovery take before the organization essentially said the event is over? Most typical response at a third was 1 to 2 weeks or roughly half a month. But you can see as you go further to the right there, you get into multiple months. And it's not a very good news picture, especially the furthest right-hand side. 15% say it took anywhere from 1 to 4 months before they thought the incident was fully resolved. And I want to launch right into the next slide because you have to assume during multiple months, obviously the IT the department, the data center has done everything they possibly can. They've brought in experts if they could. They've contacted their vendors. But the challenge is that there are third parties, but that could add to cost and delays in actually getting the systems back up. So if you look through just some of the different teams in here, Chris, I'd love to get your take on law enforcement, because while that's important to some degree, they're operating on a different time schedule, as is potentially the one right under there. The ransomware negotiator may be optimizing for payment versus for getting the system back up and running.
Absolutely, and to your point, one of the things that's important to take away from this is that none of these conversations are technical in nature. It's not about none of this is about getting actually restoring data. It's the business end of the attack, and when the ransomware negotiators, the specialists for forensics, a lot of those folks are now being required by your insurance providers, and so you have to have that type of service on hand just in case something goes wrong. When it comes to law enforcement, my experience is that they're going to do whatever it takes to solve the crime. And so getting you back up and running is not their priority, but also understanding the full scope of the crime is. And the reason that I bring that up is that you may have a single rack of servers or a single row in your data center that's been affected by ransomware, but they could very well shut down the entire data center and quarantine that off simply because they're collecting evidence and they want to make sure that they get all the evidence. And I can't imagine what it would be like to know that you've essentially contained the problem, but now you've lost the access to your entire data center. It's kind of like having an ant problem in your kitchen and then not being able to go into your house for a couple weeks.
Yeah, you're right. There are these side effects, and while it's a little bit different, it does remind me of a story back when I was an industry analyst, where the government came in and literally just yanked out server disk racks. And the reason why was not anything to do with the one company, but they were commingling or co-hosting with others at an offsite data center. And there was literally dozens of companies that weren't really line of sight of what the government was targeting. But that was not what the organization, in this case, a government branch, was interested in. They were interested in understanding the nature of a bad actor or bad intention or suspected one anyway. And others were literally just caught up in the damage associated with that. So to your point, even data that is clean could get basically, as a side effect, hit with now an outage that actually made this situation from an IT perspective worse. It increased actually the surface of what was actually deemed vulnerable.
Absolutely. That's why we call it the blast radius, right?
Yes, good point. Right. So it is very real in this regard. So we actually issued a poll, and as of about 15 minutes ago, we had just over 400 people vote on it. And this is a little bit of a tease because in a couple of weeks, we're going to actually double click on this particular data point. However, just wanted to get people's reaction to the question, what percentage of time did the bad actors from this research succeed in partially or completely modifying, deleting the backup repository? Chris, any guesses on your end?
I'm going to go with 59%.
You're close. It's actually 68. And how we got to 68 is 30%, according to our research, said, yes, they impacted most or all of our backup repositories. And 38% said some of the backups were impacted. So adding those up, 68%, there was some level of impact. So now what you've got is bad actors very quickly waking up to the notion that backup is a line of remediation against them getting paid, and they're specifically going after the repositories when they can.
And it's an ROI calculation for them,
Yes.
Right? I mean, they're really trying to figure out how to maximize their investment.
It's really very interesting. Yeah, it's kind of a spooky world. I mean, the notion that there are ransomware negotiators on both sides of this who literally could be independent parties, meaning they're not associated with your company and they're not actually associated with the bad actors other than they've been hired on their behalf. So you've now got this essentially an ecosystem around something as nefarious as cybercrime that has sprung up in regards to trying to help organizations and bad actors navigate through this journey. And speaking of that, now if we switch gears, got a few slides on the ransom and the payment of it and what actually happens. And, I'm going to take a few different cuts of this data, Chris, but I always like to joke, what's the right answer on here? The right answer is actually one of the smaller numbers, meaning, at 19%, only 1 out of 5 said that they were able to recover data and didn't have to pay the ransom.
And that number's that number's far too small.
Yeah.
But it's not surprising. And when you think about the way that the bad actors are going after your data these days, right? They're taking away your access to, or trying to take away your access to your backups. They're changing in some cases the way that your network is segmented. There's a lot of different things that they're doing that's forcing you down a path that is in line with that 52% who are paying the ransom. Although I will call out the 24% who paid the ransom and didn't get their data back. That number, I'm actually surprised that's not bigger, because when you think about the business that these organizations are in, it's about encrypting your data, or even now going back to old school, stealing your data and collecting money. It's not about decrypting the data and getting you back up and running. So they're not putting the QA resources into the decryptor or the tools to get you back up and running. So it's a pretty good bet that they're sending you the wrong decryption key. The tool itself is just not working correctly, or it was never intended to work in the first place.
Mm. Yeah, that is pretty shocking, really. And if I kind of put a little lens on that with the next chart here, 76% paid the ransom, and 1 out of 4, they paid, but they didn't get what they paid for, quite literally. And, it's interesting because if you think about this from like a hostage, a human perspective, in all the crime movies you see, it's considered bad for business if you don't pay, or rather you do get paid and you don't return, the kidnapped person unharmed or agree to whatever the bargain was. If you don't live up to that, in this case, there's really no recourse. And to your point, Chris, right from the beginning, there could never have been possibly any intention of living up to the agreement once it was put in place, despite having, quote unquote, a negotiator involved in making this seem like a semi-legitimate business transaction. But there might have been bad intentions along the way. And towards that end, I like to just point out, if I build out one more time, go back to the original screen, look at that 5% at the top, Chris. No ransom was asked for. And the phrase I like to use here is, this is more like arson, not extortion, right? Someone didn't even make any bones about it. They were just there to inflict harm.
And it's interesting because you can read a lot into that 5%. You're absolutely right. It could very well just be arson, and the reason behind that could be that a competing entity was involved with that attack, trying to take a competitor out of the game, as it were. Interestingly, I had a conversation about this when these stats came out with a friend of mine who's a malware researcher, and he was assuming, and again, it's a little bit of an assumption, but he was assuming that the ransomware failed because something got in the way, whether it's, a firewall finally caught up and blocked communication, or, segmentation kicked in, what have you. And something in your network actually caused the the ransomware to fail partway through its process. So there's a lot of reasons that 5% could be there, and none of them are good.
Yeah, yeah. And, I know you look at this, it's easy to say, well, 5%, that's a small number. But bear in mind, that's 1 out of 20 organizations. And this was a sample size of 1,000, right? So you don't want to be one of those 1 out of 20 where you just absolutely got hit. You didn't even go through the process of, engaging in a discussion about can we pay or not? Can I even obtain a decryption key? You literally just got attacked. And so the problem I see with all this is the numbers are really unfavorable from a percentage perspective. And Chris, would you agree? I've just only recently heard this phrase, but the reason that we're spending a lot of time and now going to do multi-part series on ransomware is that this is a crime of opportunity that really oftentimes, to your point, it could be a targeted attack from time to time, but most often it is just something that's completely independent of who you are as an organization, what kind of vertical you're in, what country you do business in. In other words, it's completely randomized and indiscriminate.
It absolutely is, and I think of it as ransomware has essentially democratized data theft. And what I mean by that is that in the old days, you as the victim had to have something that the bad guy could monetize, right? Whether it's PII, credit card numbers, what have you. In the case of ransomware, the data only has to be valuable to you in order for you to be willing to pay to get it back. And so that means that anybody is a potential victim these days. And you're right, they don't have to be prescriptive about what they're doing, because whether you're a Fortune 100 corporation or you're somebody's grandmother, you're still probably going to be willing to pay to get some if not all of your data back.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I want to go back to the map really quickly because I think we've had a couple large geographies come in. Australia, yep. So we've got Australia, we've got Austria as well that's also come in. So thank you very much for joining us on that. Encourage you, if you have any comments or questions, or if you haven't yet given us a shout out where you might be tuning in from, please feel free to do so. Also want to do just a quick reminder of where you can go and download this entire report. It is at VEE.am/RW22. RW just is short for ransomware 2022. VEE.am/RW22. Of course, I always like to use the phrase, and I do this a lot with our data protection trends report. You owe it to yourself to go get educated. Just go see the data, in part because it could help you if you're a data center professional. Go make the case to management about why this needs to be taken seriously. If you want to think about this as a law of numbers or averages, they don't favor you.
They absolutely don't. And you're right that this is data that can be used to justify your expenditures, or even look at what your I'll call it security maturity levels are inside the organization, and put together a program to improve them and start being more proactive about your security.
Yep, great point. Great point. Well, as we start to wind down and look ahead, coming up this Friday, our colleagues Melissa Palmer and Kirsten Stoner, I love this title, Chris. They're going to have a Friday Tech Bite on 6 reasons why we both love and hate the public cloud. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Be sure to check that out. Now, 1 week from today on the 20th is actually a U.S. holiday, so we won't have a live stream then. But the following Monday, 2 weeks from today on the 27th, Jason will be back. We'll be looking at now some of the answers or the technologies involved with how you can get into that 19% that didn't pay the ransom and did get your data back. I'll go with a little bit of a Veeam commercial there, Chris. We are very much in the business of wanting to make sure that you're in that 19% and holistically increasing that 19%.
Absolutely. And that's why that 19% is Veeam green.
That is no accident. You are right on that. And I can thank Jason for that. He actually hit the the color coding wheel on that one to make sure that we aligned with that. I just hearing that I was going to see if anything else came in. Looks like we're clean. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Encourage everyone to go check out the report. Be sure to check out this Friday about the good and the bad, if you will, on the public cloud. And we will see you here 2 weeks from today. We're going to start dissecting some of the technology answers so that you can get a better handle on your cybersecurity maturity. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everyone.